Hi, everybody. It's Ricky Heller from rickyheller.com. Welcome to Candida Corner, where I answer your questions about the anti-candida diet. Today, I'm going to talk about which processed foods are safe to eat on an anti-candida diet. Because, on my blog and with my one-on-one coaching clients, this is probably one of the most frequent questions I get, where people will say, is it okay to have oats? Is it okay to have almond milk? Is it okay to have this package of crackers that I found in the store? And I think there are different ways to approach this question, but I want to talk to you today about how I determine whether or not something is safe to eat on an anti-candida diet. So first of all, I think it's important to define what we mean when we say processed, because there are different levels of processing. And I think there's a little bit of a misconception that yes, on an anti-candida diet, you want to have things that are whole, real foods. And even though there's a little bit of leeway in terms of which exact ingredients people can have, depending on the diet you're following, there may be a different list of yes and no foods, but there's always a core list. And the one principle that more often appears in every diet is avoid processed foods, stay with whole natural foods. But realistically, the term processed means altered in some way from its natural form. So theoretically, if you pick an apple from the tree and bite into it, that's unprocessed. But if you dig up a potato out of the garden and then wash it and bake it, that baking determines processing. It's then technically processed. So really, not all processing is bad. And I don't want people to think that's the case. It's a matter of degree, and it's a matter of how much we have changed the original form of the food, either in ingredients or texture or cooking. So if you want to think of it in those terms, those are the kinds of questions to ask yourself when you're out in the grocery store or you're out at Whole Foods or wherever you're buying your all-natural, organic, healthy, anti-candida foods. Those are the kinds of questions to ask yourself. So the first thing I would look at is, how is it packaged? The choices would be like a jar or a can or bag or a box, sometimes more than one of those in the same packaging. And ideally for me, I want to go for glass first if I can. Well, let me actually step back. I want to go for nothing. If there's no packaging and it's just the food the way it normally grows, then great. That would be the ideal. But beyond that, you want to go for glass, which doesn't in any way alter the chemistry of the food. Or if you're going for cans, make sure they're BPA free, because you don't want those chemicals which disrupt your hormones and will put a further strain on your immune system when it's already fighting candida. If you go for bags, obviously paper's the best, but plastic, again, you want to see if you can go for BPA free. So those are just some considerations of the packaging. But more important is the ingredients and how much have they been changed from their original form. So I would say there are different levels there. The first one is all natural. As I said, you're picking an apple from the tree. How realistic is that for most people? Maybe not 100% of the time, right? Because I know I spend time chopping, cooking, cleaning, cooking from scratch. And certainly in the early stages of the diet, I would say that is important to do that as much as you possibly can. You don't want to be using foods that have already been tampered with before you tamper with them. So for instance, flour products, in my version of the diet, in my book, Living Candida Free, I do not advocate using flour products, because even a gluten-free flour has already been fairly significantly processed. It's been heated, it's been probably bleached, and it's been exposed to air and light and heat. Whereas if I take the grain, say millet, and I grind it up in my coffee grinder until it is a flour, that actually will create less of a reaction in me than using millet flour. So that's something to think about. But beyond that perfect natural level, I would go for foods, if you're buying packaged foods, that contain maybe one or two ingredients that are recognizable. So for instance, it's not always realistic for me to make tomato sauce from scratch. So I could buy canned tomatoes, where the contents of that can are only tomatoes and maybe sometimes salt. And then I will puree that and I will turn that into tomato sauce. Similarly, you can buy nut butters where the only ingredient is that one organic roasted nut. No oil added, no salt added. And if we're looking at just being realistic, those are much preferable to going off the diet. So you want to look for that level. And that would be the level where if I'm going to use packaged foods, that's about as far as I would go. The third level is sort of the danger. Danger, Will Robinson, you avoid. And these are the things where you have added ingredients. There's sort of that classic piece of advice that says, if you can't pronounce it or you don't recognize it as food, or if your grandmother wouldn't recognize it as food, avoid it. And that's what I would agree definitely with that concept. So things like salad dressings, where they have some of them have lots of chemicals added, or binders, or sweeteners. Obviously, you want to avoid any kind of sugars. Things like canned soups for the most part. Things like cereals, packaged cereals, even if they're presumably healthy, they often have all kinds of additives. So that's the kind of thing where you want to really avoid those packages if you can. And what it boils down to is a matter of balance between eating exactly, perfectly, 100% whole foods and real foods and natural foods, if you can, and balancing that with the realities of your everyday life. Because I know that, like me, most people who are on this diet are really busy, they have a job, they have a family, and sometimes it's just impossible. And so in those situations, I say go for what I call shortcut foods and try to keep them to a minimum. But certainly my feeling is at the beginning of the diet, when you're starting out, it is way more important to stay with the diet and not feed the candida versus making everything 100% from scratch. So in those cases, I would say at the very beginning, if you buy a jar of nut butter, I make my own nut butter. I find it quick and easy. Some people don't. So if you buy a jar of nut butter that has organic nut butter in it, that's fine. There are certain products or certain brands, and without naming brands, but there are crackers, for instance, where the only ingredients in those crackers are whole grains that have been ground up with some herbs and salt. And I eat those crackers too. Those are the kinds of things. There are brands where you can find soups or broth. Sometimes I'll buy packaged broth where the only ingredients are organic vegetables, filtered water, sea salt, and no sugar added, no binders added. The one sort of gray area with these processed foods when you're starting out are alternative milks. Because for a lot of people, giving up dairy is tough to begin with. And I know that making your own almond milk from scratch takes time. And even if you're willing to take the time, you have to remember to soak your almonds a day in advance, which I don't always do. So in those cases, I would say, go for the least offensive of those brands as you can. Look for as few ingredients added as you can and use it at an absolute minimum amount. But that is a rarity. Ideally, you want to stick with level 1 and level 2 type processing, where you're looking at whole ingredients, only 1 or 2 ingredients that have been mixed together perhaps or cooked together, and nothing else added. And just remember, this is your health and it doesn't last forever. Stage 1 is a matter of weeks, sometimes, as in my case, a couple of months. But even that, if you look at that as a percentage of your entire life, it's really a small price to pay for ultimately gaining your health. So that's how I would answer that question about which foods you can and can't eat, starting with your list of ingredients that are permitted and looking at the levels of processing there. So I hope that answered your question. Thank you so much for watching today, the Candida Corner, and I hope that was useful. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up and please subscribe to my channel. And do leave a comment. Let me know what your questions are for upcoming videos. You can leave a comment on the YouTube video or on my blog just below this video. I'd love to be able to answer more of your questions in the future. All right, thanks a lot, everybody. Go out and enjoy those foods. Bye.